11-page stories.
Written through L.T. Zupan. Read by L.T. Zupan.
Story number 7. Prarie the Settler. 1 Althea was sitting on her sofa in her living room. To the right of her were standard modern windows that were closed. The curtains were pulled so the glass was half exposed, and the radiance of the 3 p.m. sun shone through to her. The curtains were embroidered with a Fabergé egg design, in which the eggs had highlights of pinks, yellows, and golds. They wavered slightly as little gusts of wind from the ceiling fan glazed and festooned around Althea's apartment. Althea's watch was somewhat firmly fastened to her wrist. It told the time well, and had a broad silver band thatched with cross-hatching and trigger hair hands for telling both the minutes and the seconds. The hour hand was a little different, with its fleur-de-lis elements to the trunk of its structure. The poster on our wall says, "As deep as forest stars, reaching silver clear pouring." At least one of the posters, that is. In front of her rests a fake golden coffee table, the kind very close to being too loud for any reasonable human being to purchase from a little shop. She is not terribly sexual looking, whatever that might mean. Not a body that is dominated by looking sexual, yet Althea is quite pretty and can be extremely sexy when the mood exfoliates. Albert, her little fish, is swimming around in his aquarium, behaving as if he were content, perhaps. Still, perhaps not. His scales are a stony silver gray. A treasure chest sits dug into the gravel pebbles at the floor of the water box. It remains unopened, manufactured shut, you see. His water is well maintained by her, and nearly never has even the subtlest of fogginess. Her hair is brown. Nothing special, she probably would tell you. Her coffee mug also exists, and rests upon its table in front of her. Sullen, proud, and remarkable in its presence, the mug is. An ashtray next to it, with only a few cigarette butts inside of it. Althea is a bit anal expulsive, as contrasted to anal retentive, about keeping it empty. The sun that was shining through, from earlier in this story, formed a triangle as it hit the coffee table, and that triangle's tip was on the ashtray, making it glisten, voluminous. Her corduroy pants were a very light brown, almost khaki-colored. It was starting to show signs of wear around the knees and by the ankles, where the legs of the pants ended. Now, these weren't exactly taut pants. Althea rarely wore skin-tight pants or shorts. She had on an anklet that severely matched her wristwatch. Sitting alone in her living room, she was dressed to the nines, merely for herself. Well, not just merely. That might sound insulting. Opposing her, or simply facing her, at the other end of the room, was an old-fashioned 80s television set, turned off. It had the standard epic collage of brown, gray, and black. The black trimmed the vaguely crystalline gray tube cube, where the TV shows played for her on rainy nights, mainly. Not that there necessarily had to be lightning. Below the TV was a DVD player. She had rigged up to it. It was black, sleek, and assuming. Below that, a silver stereo unit with mobile audio interfacings. 2 black, narrow, monolithic speaker towers addressed the sides of the TV stand like gargoyles guardianing. She hoped her terror would not fly a paper plane into them if they had ever happened to be already on fire, because the paper plane would burn to cinders in that event, and most any of us would not want that. Her walls were rugged and even a little cracked in some places, the color of some kind of aged, nasty egg whites or shells, and what have you. She was in her mid-30s, and her skin had held itself up enough to look as it did in her 20s and even teens. Nearly pale and very soft. Her arms were crossed, and she wore a black t-shirt that was fairly tight on her torso. Crude silver pasty embossing made a Bauhaus batty kind of a shape on her t-shirt. She breathed in and out and stared at the slight detention of the black cotton over her belly button's tiny canyon. How many worlds could live in there, she sometimes thought. Whole vast colonies making it their own, kids upon grandkids. The sneakers she wore on her purple-socked feet lay pressed flat on the carpet beneath her couch, their tread mingled with smushed strands of carpet fiber underfoot, a carpeting that verily matched her hair and color, though no one usually realized it. Her living room was really just a standard rectangle of a living room. An opening to one corner of it led to a hall from which you could access bathrooms, bedrooms, a kitchen, a dining room, and more. Aside from her sofa and everything already mentioned, Althea kept a beanbag and a love seat in her living room, a bookshelf, some miscellany, etc. The fan overhead continued to sputter its circles around and around. It looked as though someone had dipped the fan blades in a flat black paint, which was rather odd. But so was the living room, although its tenant was rather sensible by most measures. A pack of Marlboro Lights sat on the table with the coffee, and with the lighter that was its companion for want of technological advance. It was a fresh pack, brand new from the grocery store, in fact. The cellophane clean, bright, and virginal. Not even the corners of the tobacco box were damaged in any visible way. It was so fresh it seemed to come from some other kind of world. A world where everything was new and untouched. Some foreign emotion emanates from that world, you know. An emotion humans and perhaps frogs understand, but also don't. Which is why we sometimes, somehow, somewhat seem to ache for it. The lighter was classy. I mean, I'll just admit to it. It was classy as fuck. Whoever I am, Golden, but obviously not real gold, and not a Zippo, but one of those unique designs certain lighters embody, where they defy classification, as it is generally accepted for them to occasionally do so. Her hands had a dark purple nail polish on their nubs of nails. Althea kept her fingernails very trimmed, but did not ever bite, for no good reason. Her pants required no belt, and the girl had left her purse back in the bathroom. One thing she had not left behind, however, was that beanbag I told you about. That fucking beanbag. Okay, it's pleather. Just understand that first. It's pleather. An almost giant baseball-looking design, with red being in the main, and black as well. It almost looked as though she kept the thing fucking polished, to be honest. A polished beanbag, yo. The beanbag was in the corner. It was adjacent in and of and to itself, and kind of near the windows. The only windows in that particular living room. I won't burden you with the goddamn term catty corner, as I live and breathe. All attempted comedy aside, her skin on her forearms was exposed, and it bunched up a little when one of the occasional cool apartmental drafts struck her. It became a patch or a field of bumps, minute hills of armscape. This did not seem to bother her much at all. Althea brought the filter tip of her cigarette to its owner's lips, which were barren but not parched. Some people might say they asked for lipstick, but the color was pleasant enough in all actuality. The skin grasped around the filter to create a suction, and her lips, of course, wrinkled a little in the process. When she removed the filter, smoke blanketed the vicinity, as Althea flung out a tunnel of it into the space. A funnel-shaped torrent of complexity incarnated and expressed itself, complicating and dissipating simultaneously, tangents upon tangents of visual construction. each frame a worthless moment and a priceless work of art, rather like the clouds beyond the walls of the apartment building. Above her lips was a natural divot, the same one most everybody has. The pink love seat adorned the western regions of said room, what with white pillows, and it was clearly the sexiest of all the furniture, and she knew it. Why have a love seat unless it functions as a true love seat? Like that's anything new. Anyhow, on her bookshelf weren't action figures, no. Just framed photos and dusty books. It was a tan bookshelf, and it stood shoulder high, depending on your height. The photo frames were metallic, most of them, with flowery designs implanted on them. She cleaned them of their dust once a month. Althea stared into space. 2... Standing lamps flanked the speakers like a phalanx. They had yellow hoods over their bulbs. The hoods were shady, technically, but they weren't slim shady, for the sake of clarity. The lamps weren't even witty, much like all of humanity supposedly isn't. And a painting held the main empty space on the wall, a painting of a dog and a clown. It was fuzzy, and it took a minute before you could even tell what those figures were. The cigarette Althea was almost done smoking has many, many tiny little gray lines printed on its paper. Or maybe that's the reds. I don't know. The stream of steam drifting from the coffee's mug blended nicely with the tobacco smoke's rivulet. Not a helix, but that could always be imagined if necessary, Althea thought. Her lighter had a tree engraved on it, a theme of trees, which she knew went beyond one single soul and its story. The small inside ledge of the window was a basic wooden thing. The treetops were clearly seen when one looked at and out the windows. They were as dark green as it ever was. Althea Daniels didn't know a damn thing about the names of foliage and forestry, so she may have called the treetops juniper, just for the heck of it. Clouds began to blot out the sun rhythmically. They eventually gave up their blight. 3... Her face, unlike the unremarkable room, was pure and radiant. It contained a very clear and visible child who had never grown up, as well as an old woman who had always been there. Its appearance shone out a loud and beautiful synergy and symmetry of the two. A slight curve to the crescents of her eyebrows, a small and mild nose, quietly roundly shaped, cheeks and a forehead and a chin which all furnished an oval-shaped face, ears that were small that jutted harshly out like a mouse, and lips that were somehow both flat and full and lent themselves to the belief that she must be very intelligent if not very wise. Her eyelashes were bordering on cliché, being as they were quite long indeed. Althea did not wear glasses, not even sunglasses usually. Her eyes are violet and blue. No, she does not wear contacts, as she has tiredly explained to countless strangers throughout her life. She was just born with the violet and the blue. Strands of color extended from her pupils in a starburst fashion, and the whites of her eyes are like the various white keys of various pianos. She was wise and therefore found racism to be stupid at best. She drank a satisfying sip of coffee and thought about playing music on the stereo. She slowly decided against it. Her soul matched her eyes and gave up trying to understand itself long, long ago. 4... The sun continued to shine. It was relentless. The curtains were proportioned equally with their coloration. The colors seemed to have no regard as to whether they went inside or outside of the Fabergé eggs stenciled and stitched onto them. No discernible objects made their way into existence out of the endless swirls and movements of color. This wouldn't stop someone from trying to find something where there was nothing, though. The face of her wristwatch was a shiny deep blue. It seemed to have had its paint brushed on with the finest of combs, leaving strokes you could see. The poster, with its quote, had an image below the lettering, a black bicycle riding on a mountain trail with no rider. It looked correct and made you feel the same as if you saw a bike with a person on it. Holding the handlebars and pedaling, red roses lined the bike path. 5 The surface top of the fake gold coffee table was an opaque frosted glass, vaguely cyan, turquoise, and pastel. Different plants made of plastic and made to look like fern floated to and fro in Albert's fish home. He never closed his eyes, never blinked, because he was incapable of that. Maybe he closed his eyes from the inside, in a way, when it was time to rest and recharge. Althea had her hair in a single braid in the back, thick and knotty, like a helix, as braids go. Her coffee mug is wide and ceramic. It has no lid, and Althea is fond of this dangerous fact. Her ashtray, which she possessed, was an emerald green glassy thing, cubic. 6 The sun still penetrated the ashtray, and Althea did have a fifth pocket on her pants. Even that tiny pocket had its striped corduroy fabric. She occasionally kept a tiny bone or a small seashell in that pocket. In the past, she kept a diary key in it. Her panties were black, and somehow between silk and polyester, they were plain, maybe bland. The television helped express her sense of humor by letting an antennae live on it, one with bunny ears with tinfoil on the ends. From the box of the television streamed a black cord which had metal running through it in order to conduct volts of electricity from inside the walls to the power structures of the TV box. The outlet's American faceplate on the wall had those timeless faces, the ones that always looked shocked and open at the mouth and eyes. Open so everyone could stick metal into them and power their toasters and make bagels and put Nutella, butter, and Philadelphia cream cheese on them. Open as both a constant warning via their shocked or shocking expression, and open as a constant invitation. Open just because they knew that was how they were supposed to be. And Althea did have her appliances very much plugged in. The walls of the room seemed to look bigger than they should have, somehow. A tag was hanging out the back of her t-shirt's neck ring. Sometimes when she didn't wax, which was often, the tiniest amount of light-colored fuzz would appear on her upper lip. She wondered often if this would become a problem in the future, but she didn't wonder enough to penetrate the internet's knowledge banks and research the subject. She wore airwalks. The fan whirled casually and causally. By and by, dust had clotted onto the back sides of its dark fan blades. The central hub behaved as a spider's body might, directing the evenly measured limbs to do what must be done and ultimately cooling the utter totality of the fucking living room. She stood around 5'1" high. Her hands were smallish. Her fingers' appearance did not protrude into anyone's good-natured judgment. They weren't lanky, they weren't stubby. Althea could probably have done herb garlic butter commercials, or commercials with chives. Commercial chives. Chives. Her left thumbnail's polish had a light chip in its purple, like a crack in the ice of her nail lake. This isn't even worth pondering, some would say, that I would say, that some would say that I would, but not back in Vietnam, of course. You get your fucking head blown off in Nam. No short stories in Nam. The beanbag looked as though it had never been set in, but we all know someone has. Althea patted her cigarette on the tray, dropping ash. 7 The smoke curled. It was a soft pink, that love seat, not a loud and clear pink. The white on the pillows looked almost dental. The bookshelf was made of a thick and heavy wood, and it covered a waxy spot on the carpet from before she had first moved in. Wax and wine. The lamps had twisty bodies that curved up out of the ground like gnarly networks of lamp roots. Their yellow shades were nearly shaped like light bulbs or teardrops, or some such thing. The clown in the painting did not have its face showing, but it was clearly handing some balloons to someone outside of the picture. The dog might have been drooling, but it was way too fuzzy to recognize. Althea sometimes wondered how old that piece was. She had picked it up at some random antique shop. The coffee wasn't steaming as powerfully as it once had. It had settled into itself, in a sort of a way. The clouds were fixing to come back with a vengeance, but now they were all gone as all get out. She blinked. 8... And so, the photographs on the bookshelf. Well, they were average. A now deceased pet, some family members, the like. Most of the books were less than 50 years old. One of them was wide and had a dark matted green covering, as if someone had stitched in the green and made it a cover worthy of judging by the book. It was the kind of heavy bookcase that was hard to move even when empty, if someone was so inclined. Sometimes the thought crossed Althea's mind to buy an additional poster somewhere, or to get a laptop, but she was more older-fashioned than her physical years may be warranted. Albert's fens were scarfy and flaccid and interesting. He was a docile creature, doing what he did. He never banged into the walls of his cage intentionally. He had no weaponry. Though Althea and Albert were rather similar, they remained strange associates in this life. She turned the fan off. 9... Her forehead rarely wrinkled under any emotional condition. She blinked again. She thought about getting her third cup of coffee for the day and decided against it. Her mug was now a quarter full. The drapery around the window fluttered one last time, as the fan had been switched all the way to its off position and function. A few particles of dust settled, in a way that wasn't boring, onto one of the books. It was atomic when you looked very, very close up, of course. Her couch was the darkest of reds. Some people would say nothing really matched in this room of hers, and that perhaps she had no taste when slowly assembling it. She did not like the concept of excessive pillows on furniture, and there were none on the sofa. She crossed her legs and lit another cigarette. Althea Daniels drank another moderate sip of coffee and stared at the blank TV screen. What a lovely day, she thought. This is nice and peaceful. 10... Her breasts were small and her shoes were blue. Her nipples a bright pink and small, her eyebrows full. She was not a terribly angry person, and she never really got along with people who were. Too much of a huff, she has told you. The glass on the coffee table needed to get Windexed, or at least washed. The trees rustled. Her toenails, which were inside of her shoes and socks, needed to get clipped. The sunlight triangle was now pulled back from the ashtray, but it was as golden as ever. Althea had smoked 1/3 of this fresh and new smoke. She had 14 left in the pack, and a few packs stowed away in her bedroom closet, as good a place to keep them as any. She put her Marlboro out prematurely and leaned back. The rays of the sun landed on the bottom knob of her brown braid. The poster also had a fountain, and not a very exciting one, in its background. Gray or silver, which are sometimes the same, sometimes are not, and the carpet was not shag, it was some other kind of carpet.